All right, this next section of lesson one deals with some of the anatomy of the wall of the heart and also the coronary arteries, which are going to be very important as we talk about the atherosclerosis in lesson number two. So first we talk about here the wall of the heart where you have the endocardium. So the inside, imagine blood would be here inside the chamber. You have the myocardium, so the heart tissue that we think of the strong muscles of the heart for pumping. You have the epicardium, which is the outside of the heart tissue. You have the pericardial cavity, and then you have this fibrous pericardium, which acts like a netting around the heart for its integrity. Here's also the coronary arteries and veins that feed the parts of the heart. Here's just a table that kind of illustrates each of the different parts of the heart. You'll find this in your notes. It just gives a little bit more of the details of each layer of the heart. You also have the blood vessels. It's important to know these, the order. You have the arteries, which carry the blood away from the ventricles of the heart. Arterioles receive blood from the arteries and carry blood to the capillaries. Arterioles are responsible for controlling the blood pressure throughout the heart. We have capillaries. This is the smallest blood vessels of the body, sites of exchange of substances between blood and the body cells. Once it leaves the capillaries and the tissues, it goes to the venules, which receive blood from the capillaries, and then finally the veins carry the blood toward the ventricles of the heart. So this is kind of the order from arteries, arterioles, capillaries, venules, veins, and then back to the heart. Here's the anatomy of the artery and the vein. This is going to be very important as we talk about atherosclerosis, so pay close attention. Here we have the artery, we have the vein. Going from the inside out, we have the lumen of each. The vein has the valve that prevents blood flow going backwards to ensure that blood only goes back towards the heart. Then you have a thin layer of endothelial tissue called the tunica interna. It's also known as the tunica intima, I-N-T-I-M-A, and we'll refer to it as the tunica intima throughout the course. But that is where a lot of the plaque is built up. The next slide here indicates what the view of the tunica intima looks like. So we have the intima here, and here's the lumen. And the tunica intima has a thin layer of endothelial tissue, and inside or underneath that is an extracellular matrix. And it's right here where you have the plaque that builds up that we're going to talk about in lesson number two. So when we talk about the plaque building up, it's right underneath the endothelial layer of the tunica intima here. And it's in the extracellular matrix where that plaque builds up. A lot of videos will show that the plaque builds up on the top of the endothelial layer, but that's incorrect. It's underneath the endothelial layer in this extracellular matrix. You also have the connective tissue, and then followed by the tunica media. This is some smooth muscle cells. You see it's much thicker in the arteries versus it is in the vein. That helps with the integrity of the arteries. And the tunica media is going to be important when we talk about atherosclerosis and the fibrous cap. We'll talk more about that later. And finally, the tunica externa, which gives the integrity to the arteries and the veins themselves. We won't talk too much about that, but it's the outer layer of each vessel that gives us kind of the integrity of it. Again, just looking at a cross-sectional view, we talked about the tunica intima. We have here now is the tunica media, here in the green, the smooth muscle cells. Smooth muscle cells is what it's made up of. And then you have the eventia or the externa, which just gives the outside, gives it the integrity of the vessel itself. Make sure again that you have a good understanding, especially of the tunica intima here, because this is where a lot of what we're going to talk about in lesson two, where the plaque builds up. Again, just the overview of the cardiovascular system that we talked about before, where you have the left side of the heart pumps through the aortic valve, through the aorta here, through the elastic arteries, the arterioles, the capillaries, the exchange of oxygenated blood with the tissues, then it comes back into the venules, into the veins in the right side of the heart, and then to the lungs to exchange the tissues, and it repeats the process over and over again. Now again, here's the order of the artery from the heart to the arteries, arterioles, capillaries, venules, and vein. What you should gather from this, and just notice again, this is just kind of the structure of each of them. Notice again that each of them have a single layer of endothelial tissue, and then they vary in whether or not they have elastic tissue, smooth muscle, and then fibrous tissue. But again, notice that they all have a thin layer of endothelial tissue. The thinner layers, the arterioles, capillaries, and venules, they tend to lack some of the elastic tissue that makes up the arteries and the veins themselves. But this just gives you, again, what kind of tissue you'll find in each of the blood vessels. Again, just some of the characteristics, again, of the arteries. They're thick, strong wall, endothelial lining, middle layer of the smooth muscle and elastic tissue, carries blood under relatively high pressure. So you have our heart to the artery, and then you have the arterioles, thinner wall than artery, endothelial layer. Helps control blood flow into a capillary and is responsible for controlling blood pressure in our body. Here's a closer look at the arteriole. The smallest arterioles only have a few smooth muscle fibers. Capillaries lack those muscle fibers. They also have these capillary or precapillary sphincters that will dilate or contract based on the blood flow. And again, it controls the amount of blood that gets to the capillaries themselves. Here's the capillaries, the smallest diameter blood vessels, extension of inner lining of arterioles. Walls are endothelial only, so it's a very small, thin layer of endothelial tissue, and that allows for easy gas exchange between the blood and the tissue itself. And it's semi-permeable, which means that it's able to get, things are able to leak out and into, out of the blood and into the blood through the layer, this endothelial cell layer. Here's just the capillary network where you have the arterioles. They move into the smaller capillaries where you have the exchange of nutrients, and then you have, it leaves the capillaries into the venules themselves. So the regulation of capillary blood flow, again, as mentioned, you have the precapillary sphincters in the arterioles, and they may close the capillary. They respond to the needs of the cells. So if there's high demand for oxygenated blood to that tissue, then the precapillary sphincters will dilate, opening up, allowing for more blood flow to the capillaries. And in times when not as much blood is needed, they will contract, preventing blood flow to the capillaries and that part of the tissue. Then you have the venules that when they leave the capillaries, the venules accept the blood from the capillaries. And then from the venules, you have the veins themselves that carry the blood. They're thick wall. They have valves that prevent the black flow of blood. Here you can see that the veins have these valves. They close to make sure that the blood flow does not go back, but instead goes in one direction towards the heart. And this is a summary table of the various characteristics of the vessels, making sure that, again, you know the different characteristics, and you'll find this here in your notes as well. Some key points to take away: all vessels contain a single layer of endothelial cells. You have a layer of smooth muscle that surrounds all vessels except for capillaries and postcapillary venules. Again, you have some review here that you can, the structure, the various structures of the arteries, veins. Also some review, again, some labeling exercises. I'll put this here in Blackboard. You'll find this in the review for the exam 1 as well. That will give you some idea as to the review for this, for lesson number 1. Finally, we also talk about the composition of whole blood. Just a FYI here, you have the centrifuge. When you draw blood, you centrifuge or you spin it down. blood is made up of plasma, where it's mainly water, some proteins, and then you have the red blood cells at the bottom with a little bit of white blood cells. And then the hematocrit is basically the formed elements over the total blood volume. So basically, this is the red blood cells over the total blood volume. But this just gives you, again, about the blood volume. The important thing for us is we're going to talk about the white blood cells. They're going to be important when we talk about atherosclerosis. All right, so this concludes the lesson number 1. Make sure you do the review on Blackboard. Again, review the video if necessary about the anatomy of the heart, the blood flow to the heart, and also the coronary artery circulation, or the coronary circulation. All right, make sure you do some review, and then we'll move on. After you have a good review, we'll move on to the next lesson.